Danielle, I can't seem to get the agenda to come up as a separate Zoom image. Are you able to pull it up yourself? For some reason, I have it up, but it's not, the Zoom is not cooperating.
Yeah, but I don't know if I have the most recent one.
I sent it back to you earlier.
Okay.
That's the one. Good morning, everybody. I'm Michael Diamond. I am the co-chair of the Vertical Flight Society's Hydrogen Council, eVTOL Hydrogen Council. Joining me today is our speaker, Dave Edlund, of course, Danielle McLean, our co-chair for the council, and as I'm seeing, a number of other interested parties. So I want to remind everybody that this session will be recorded so that others who were unable to make it can go onto the VFS website and play things back. With that in mind, we are going to start right now. So I will be introducing our invited speaker, Dave, in a moment. Just to cover off on the agenda for today, after Dave Edlund's briefing on methanol to energy conversion, we'll have a Q&A. I will be asking people to put their questions into the chat box so that when we get to the Q&A, I'll start with those. And then I'll be calling on people directly after that point. That will hopefully help to get us through this. There's quite a bit of material that we have to cover on this session. After the paper and the Q&A, I'm very happy to let the council know that there are a number of bills and new policies and legislation that have come out regarding hydrogen and fuel cells, which we're going to distribute a summary memo on. But I will be going through some of that information to inform us of very exciting developments. Those of you who are, please put your calls on mute. Everybody, thank you. After that, we'll have an open discussion, and Danielle will be talking about the in-person session in San Jose, the workshop that we have intended to hold on hydrogen and eVTOL in San Jose at the end of January. So with that in mind, let me start then. I want to introduce Dave Edlund. I'm going to master this share screen thing as best I can. So, all right, that's a bit of eye candy. I'm sorry, but I'll just read. Dave Edlund is the co-founder and CEO of Element One. Can I please ask you to put your Zoom calls on mute? Somebody there's cross noise coming in. Thank you. Dave Edlund is the co-founder and CEO of Element One Corporation, headquartered in Bend, Oregon. He graduated from the University of Oregon in 1987 with a Ph.D. in chemistry and has worked developing fuel cells, hydrogen generation technology, and hydrogen purification membranes for 35 years. Dave has authored an engineering textbook on methanol conversion to hydrogen, as well as chapters on hydrogen purification technology in 2 other leading engineering texts. Dr. Edlund holds 116 US patents and more than 350 foreign patents. Before I turn the platform over to Dr. Edlund, I'm going to give you a brief preamble on his discussion. And to do that, I think I have to go back for a moment. Bear with me. View. Full screen. Okay, this should work. How's that coming through? We're good? Okay, fine. So just very quickly, this Dr. Edlund's paper is going to talk about methanol to hydrogen to energy conversion. The concept behind hybrid flight is that batteries are augmented using power sources that may burn Jet A or may burn hydrogen or methanol. And the idea behind these types of hybrid concepts is that the battery power is necessary for takeoff and landing, but the fuel cell can be used to charge the batteries during flight and while parked on the ground. This reserves battery power for takeoff and landing. The capability of these fuel cells will be to also recharge batteries, whether it's in flight or on the ground, and potentially able to reduce the number of batteries on the vehicle itself. So there's a trade-off between these in these various modules. So the Dr. Edlund is going to be talking about how methanol can be used in a fuel cell configuration that converts to hydrogen and then feeds through the hydrogen to electrical charging process directly to engines or motors and indirectly to batteries. What's interesting about methanol is that it's a ubiquitous fuel. It's available, generally speaking. It can be regularly tanked and treated like any other fuel. It can be pumped through pipelines. Its current cost is in the range of a $1.50, $1.75 a gallon. And lastly, just some other interesting facts that he's going to talk about. So the point I like to make is that a gallon of methanol has more recoverable hydrogen than an equivalent volume of liquid hydrogen. So you want to think about that. And so we're not burning ethanol, we are converting ethanol. And this is what permits the energy density properties that we are seeking in eVTOL flight. So ethanol is safe to transport, store, and use. It's available now. It's widely available. You can even buy methanol on Amazon or eBay. And the production of methanol is increasingly being made from biomass and from renewable energy. So some of the graphics here illustrate the fact that there's a methanol market, and the discussion that will follow here is going to inform us about the benefits of this capability. So Dave, if you can take control of the screen, I'm going to stop share. And please have at it.
Got it. Getting it set up here. Let me make sure I got this set up right.
Okay. We're a very forgiving group, as I just showed you.
Okay, is that showing?
Perfect.
Great. All right, it's a pleasure to be here this morning, and I want to share with you the potential that methanol offers as a green and economical precursor to hydrogen. We'll be talking, of course, about applications in fuel cells, but we can also think about this as a way of tackling infrastructure challenges, maybe even related to charging of batteries using electricity. So when I was asked to put this presentation together, there were really two questions that I wanted to focus on, and that is, how should we perceive the challenge of supplying affordable and clean hydrogen to various locations for use in aircraft? These locations may be urban, they may be remote. And then the second question, or the second challenge, is building out charging infrastructure, electric vehicle charging infrastructure, which it's really a formidable challenge. I drive an electric car, and I know firsthand the challenges of trying to recharge that when you're a long ways away from your home base. So keep both of those in mind as we go through this presentation. Yeah, we'll talk about putting hydrogen generators on board aircraft, but that's not the only opportunity to look at here. It's probably the most rewarding, but it's not the only one. So hydrogen generators have years of commercial deployment history and stationary power. They're beginning to be explored for use on board heavy duty trucking. So a hydrogen generator on board a truck. And we're also moving into the maritime space with hydrogen generators on board brown water working boats, tugboats, towboats, as well as larger ships that cross the oceans. This is not intended to be a presentation about the hydrogen generator per se. And for that reason, I'm going to introduce it briefly, but we can certainly have more conversations about that at a later time. So when we think about hydrogen generators in the aviation and aerospace sector, there's really these two applications, and I just want to mention them again. so that these are in the back of your mind as we go through the presentation. The first and perhaps the most straightforward application is going to be supporting infrastructure. So that's hydrogen fueling stations if you want to put compressed hydrogen on board aircraft. And it could also be battery charging stations if you are interested in recharging batteries on board a manned or unmanned aircraft. The home run is probably onboard hydrogen generation. So put a machine on board the aircraft that converts methanol mixed with water into hydrogen on demand. And we'll touch on this. The principal advantage appears to be extended range, but this is a concept at the moment. And we're embarking on a high-level feasibility study. We, by the way, is Element One and Nexa Capital in order to explore this space and tap into the commercial opportunity. We formed a partnership with that goal in mind. And we welcome comments and participation from others in this community as we get into this high-level feasibility study. So the presentation is organized according to this outline. I'll provide a short introduction to Element One. I do want to spend some time talking about renewable methanol, explain what it is, why it has a low carbon footprint. And the question invariably comes up when discussing renewable methanol, well, what about renewable hydrogen? And so I'll provide a few slides on that. I won't spend a whole lot of time there, but again, we can come back during Q&A if there's interest. The economics are extremely important, so I'll show how that works with methanol. And then unique to methanol as a feedstock for hydrogen, we have the option to drive carbon emissions into the negative range and even strongly negative range. And that presents a lot of very interesting business opportunities. And then finally, I'll wrap up with conclusions. Element One is an independently owned company. We were founded in 2010. We're located in Bend, Oregon in the Pacific Northwest. Our business model is technology development and licensing. We do have licensing partners, and we also have joint venture partners where we have an equity stake in the joint venture in lieu of some or all of future royalty streams. In China, we have a business development office, about a half-hour high-speed train ride south of Shanghai. Currently, we're at 22 full-time persons, and we do all of our technology development in Oregon. So a little bit about methanol. Methanol, as Michael pointed out, is a wonderful hydrogen carrier. And it's not just methanol that we're going to be talking about. It's methanol mixed with water. And the reason for that, that I'll show you in a minute, is that water is also a source of the hydrogen that we're going to extract. Now, if we talk about the hydrogen content of methanol, we're really not looking at the entire energy content of methanol. We're ignoring energy that comes from carbon in the methanol, only focused on hydrogen. And that's where we're using this term called hydrogen equivalence. So in this graph, we have aqueous methanol, which is methanol mixed with water on a 1-to-1 molar ratio. That's what we're going to use in the hydrogen generator. The green bars are energy per liter, so volumetric energy density. And the blue bars are energy per kilogram. So this is volumetric and gravimetric energy density. Again, the hydrogen content only. If we could store pure methanol and then add water in a small mixing tank just prior to extracting the hydrogen, we get even better numbers. And in the case of shipping, that's very feasible. I don't know if it makes sense to consider that for aircraft. So we're going to focus on aqueous methanol, and you'll see that across the board, it compares well with compressed hydrogen, ammonia, when you include the tankage. So it's a very attractive option for extracting hydrogen. So then, what is the chemistry that we're dealing with? Methanol is a very simple molecule, the simplest alcohol. It has one carbon atom in it. And when we react that methanol with water, we can get up to 3 equivalents of hydrogen from each equivalent of methanol or water. 1/3 of that product hydrogen comes from the water. Now, I'm not going to go to it right now, but one of our licensing partners, Rick's Industries, has put together, I think it's a 3-minute video that describes this process, and I'd encourage you to go to their website and take a look at it if you want to get a better idea of how this all works in a machine. In this slide, what I've shown you here is a very simple process schematic. The process is simple. We take methanol and water. It gets pumped into a heated zone where the methanol and water is vaporized, and then in a catalytic reactor, it's converted to hydrogen and other gases. A purifier separates pure product hydrogen out from those other gases. Pure product hydrogen is cooled with the incoming methanol water and leaves the system. The other gases and a small amount of the hydrogen goes to a burner where heat is generated to supply the needs of the vaporizer and the reforming reactor. Characteristically, there is no SOx pollution, no NOx, no particulate matter. Because carbon monoxide is a byproduct, we do have to purify the hydrogen to use it with a PEM fuel cell. We do that with a proprietary membrane process, and we get ISO 14687 grade hydrogen, which is suitable for use in fuel cells. This slide just shows a sample of some of the machines. We span a range of small machines, which will support fuel cells up to about 10 kilowatts in power. These machines have been deployed for telecom power, both primary and backup, mostly in Southeast Asia. Larger machines that we call the M series for mobility and L for large simply are just scaled up versions, which provide up to hundreds of kilograms a day of hydrogen to support fuel cells up to 200 kilowatts in electrical output. So the capability of generating hydrogen can be applied either on board a vehicle, and in that case, we're talking about extended range. So when we look at land-based vehicles, the answer is extended range, much further driving range than you can get with compressed hydrogen. And the same would be true for aircraft. And then fast and easy refueling, which goes a long ways to overcome the challenge of compressed hydrogen fueling infrastructure. We can also look at using these machines as land-based hydrogen fueling stations. And I'll talk a little bit about that when I get to the topic of renewable hydrogen. And then a third option is you use a hydrogen generator in conjunction with a fuel cell in either a stationary or mobile platform to produce electricity for a charging station. And in doing that, you overcome all of the bottleneck in the grid. Think about a real good analogy here is going from wired telephones, which was the case when I was a kid, to a cellular network where you completely skip all of the wires for communication. The same can be done with electricity generation. And when you're talking about battery charging and the amount of power required at each charging station, this seems to make a lot of sense. Here's an example of a project we did last year in China. This is a medium-duty truck made by FAW. In this space, in this cabinet behind the cab, one would normally find 8 cylinders to store compressed hydrogen. The fuel cell in this truck is made by Refire under license from Ballard. And here you see that the hydrogen generator occupies a little over half of that space. So the physical volume required by the hydrogen generator for extended range transportation is less than the volume required to store compressed hydrogen. Now I'm going to switch to renewable methanol. And It's not a new concept, and there's commercial plants that I'll talk about in a minute. But the whole principle of renewable methanol is it follows from mimicking the natural carbon cycle. So, you know, you probably recall seeing this in science classes, beginning science classes. CO2 enters the atmosphere from decay of organic matter, from byproducts of biologic life, animal life. And then that CO2 from the atmosphere is captured by plants through photosynthesis. So we have this natural cycle of carbon dioxide. And that gets upset when you have man-made activities, man-caused activities or human-caused activities, such as emissions from burning fossil fuel. But we can think about a completely synthetic route, so again, a human-derived route that mimics the CO2 cycle. And that's shown here, where we take all of the sources of greenhouse gas emissions, which is primarily CO2, but not only CO2. That's emissions from landfill sites, degrading plant life, burning of fossil fuels, and of course, byproducts from animals and humans, waste. These sources, which also include methane, by the way, and methane, of course, is an even stronger greenhouse gas than CO2. But we can take these emissions and through chemical processes, we can basically convert that CO2 and methane into methanol. So think of taking these emissions and sequestering those greenhouse gases in methanol. Now, if the methanol is burned or otherwise converted to CO2, that emission comes back to the environment, but in the form of CO2. The methane emission is totally avoided. And that's a very powerful step in achieving a very low carbon intensity. So here's an example that's in practice today. This is the biogenic carbon pathway, where we take waste gases from decaying organic matter or from animal waste or human waste, or maybe even landfill waste. And we add energy in the form of heat and electricity to convert that waste to methanol. The methanol then with water is converted to pure hydrogen. That pure hydrogen can make energy in a fuel cell. It could also be burned in an engine if you're so inclined. In that process, you release 69 grams of CO2 per megajoule of energy. That's the same amount of greenhouse gas that we've removed from the environment in the process of making the methanol. So these two exactly offset each other. And then that CO2 goes back into the environment where it's cycled or recycled, in this case, through the biogenic pathway. Now, in this example, the only net greenhouse gas emissions are from this source of energy that's used to convert the feedstock into methanol. Now, a second pathway, which more directly mimics the natural carbon cycle, is where we capture CO2 either from the atmosphere, that would be called direct air capture, or from industrial processes. And in the case of industrial processes, this is, has been under commercial production in Iceland, I think for more than a decade now, the oldest renewable methanol plant globally. So the idea is that we take green electricity to make hydrogen. That hydrogen is combined with CO2 either through direct air capture or from industrial byproducts. The CO2 is sequestered in methanol, and then again we go through this cycle of converting the methanol with water to hydrogen and releasing the CO2 back to the atmosphere. Now, those two processes summarize the different pathways to green or renewable methanol. And in this chart, I've shown you several different, I'll call it flavors of renewable methanol. They're all shown with the green lines here in the middle, depending on the specific feedstock that is used to make that methanol. So we could use electricity from the grid, either the US grid or the European grid, to make green methanol, but you see it's not really very green. In fact, the emissions or the carbon intensity from fossil fuels. Take renewable electricity. So hydro, wind, PV, we can get to very low carbon intensity in making that methanol. If we use biogenic sources like municipal solid waste from landfills, biomass, or other forms of organic waste, or animal manure, I would add in here that the sewage sludge left over from waste treatment plants at big cities would fit into this as well. You can get into, again, low to even strongly negative numbers. And the reason, again, that you get into negative numbers is by the avoidance of methane emission, methane being 28 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. The gold dashed line here shows European Renewable Energy Directive second level, or the current level. And again, renewable methanol falls below that. The dashed red line is what you would see if you converted this methanol to hydrogen and then compared that hydrogen to the new US definition of clean hydrogen, which is less than 2 kilograms of CO2 emission per kilogram of hydrogen. So you can see that renewable methanol compares very well with even the US definition of clean hydrogen. So renewable methanol is not just a concept, it's reality. In Iceland, we have the Carbon Recycling International plant. As I mentioned, this has been operating, I believe, for a decade. In this plant, CO2 is captured from this factory in the background, and using electricity made from geothermal energy, which they have a lot of in Iceland, they make renewable methanol and export it for different functions. In Alberta, Canada, we have the Enerchem plant. This factory, or this chemical plant, takes landfill gas from the Edmonton landfill and converts it to methanol. And then in the Netherlands, we have the MCN plant, which takes biogas, which is piped to this plant from various locations, and converted to methanol. And there are about 35 commercial renewable methanol plants operating globally now, and many more either on the drawing board or under construction. So briefly, let me contrast renewable methanol, green or renewable hydrogen. First of all, renewable hydrogen is generally made by electrolysis of water. It's a very energy intensive process where you would put 50 or 55 kilowatt hours of electricity to work splitting water to get 1 kilogram of hydrogen. And so that's shown here in this diagram with the 3 lightning bolts going into converting water into hydrogen. That's 66% efficient at the moment. The hydrogen is then compressed or liquefied and distributed, where it's converted into fuel cell at about 55% efficiency. And so you end up with overall 3 units of electricity beginning the process to get 1 unit of electricity coming out at the end. So overall, it's not very energy efficient. But the big problem, the challenge to overcome, is in this distribution of compressed hydrogen. If you look at renewable sources of electricity in the United States, this is true for any region of the world, you're going to find that those resources are not evenly distributed. So for PV in the United States, it's mostly focused in the Southwest. For wind, mostly focused in the Midwest. And that means that if you use that renewable energy to make hydrogen, you're faced with a challenge of having to move that hydrogen in some cases, long distances. And that's the challenge here. So hydrogen, for the most part, is moved by truck. And in the case of compressed hydrogen, it's moved in what's called a tube trailer. Here you see a photograph of one. This trailer hauls 300 kilograms of hydrogen. Now, if you look at moving methanol as a carrier for hydrogen, methanol is a liquid. It does not need to be compressed, so you can use normal fuel tankers like this Chevron tanker. And this truck would haul 43,900 liters of methanol, which is enough to make hydrogen to fill 21 of these tube trailers. And so that really is the message here. With using methanol as a carrier for hydrogen, being a liquid under normal conditions, methanol is very easily transported in large volume at a low cost. Hydrogen is challenged to do that. In this slide, you see the yellow portion of this bar graph is the greenhouse gas emissions associated with moving that hydrogen by truck 300 kilometers. Now, the economics of methanol. Being green is great, but it also has to be affordable. And in this slide, I showed you a little more detail about the actual chemistry that occurs. Previously, the reaction equation was the idealized equation. Nature doesn't work that way, unfortunately, and we have this carbon monoxide byproduct that we have to separate from the product hydrogen in order to get fuel cell grade hydrogen. Nevertheless, the bulk of the carbon in our product gases is expressed as carbon dioxide. That becomes important when we look at future capability to drive the carbon emissions into strongly negative terrain. And we can do this process and recover hydrogen, fuel cell grade hydrogen, at 84% energy efficiency. The reason we can do that is because we take the byproduct gases, CO principally being one of those, and burn that to get energy. CO is actually a pretty good fuel. The result is that 6.9 kilograms of methanol yields 1 kilogram of hydrogen. At $500 per metric ton for the cost of methanol, which is about where we are at the moment, you generate hydrogen at $3.45 per kilogram based on the cost of the methanol. Yes, we have to add deionized water to that, but that's a negligible cost. And the addition of maintenance is also minimal to negligible. So, you know, it's comfortable to say that we can produce hydrogen for about $3.50 per kilogram from methanol at current pricing. Now, future directions. Okay. If we look inside the hydrogen generator, as I pointed out before, the methanol in water is vaporized, and then it is chemically converted or reformed into a syngas. The syngas actually has a lot of CO2 in it, and some hydrogen, a lot of hydrogen, some carbon monoxide. That syngas is purified in a membrane process. Pure hydrogen crosses that membrane and is delivered then to be used by fuel cells. The waste gas, which contains the CO2, some carbon monoxide, a small amount of hydrogen, becomes a fuel stream where it is burned. That gives us an option of capturing CO2 from this fuel stream. The other option is to look at the combustion exhaust that exits the system, and we could capture CO2 at that point as well. And that, by the way, is normally where one would look to capturing CO2, for instance, from operating an engine where you burn fossil fuel, and the byproduct of that is CO2. However, that combustion exhaust is at low pressure, basically ambient. The carbon dioxide is strongly diluted because of air for combustion. And also because of that air for combustion, you have a very high flow rate. In comparison, if we look at this internal stream, this fuel stream, which again is mostly CO2, 80% of our carbon emissions are as CO2 in that fuel stream. We have high pressure, we have high concentration of CO2, and we have 1/3 the flow rate compared to the combustion gas outlet. So this internal fuel gas stream is ideal for CO2 capture and sequestration. And this drawing on the right shows how that would be done. You just direct that fuel stream through a heat exchanger to cool it, sequester or capture the CO2 for sequestration, and then the CO2 lean gas goes back to the we're currently engaged in a joint research agreement with Aramco. Aramco has developed small-scale and mobile carbon capture technology that was demonstrated on a Class 8 truck. Here you can see that chemical process for capturing the CO2 fits behind the cab. We think this is very attractive for marine and for other stationary applications like hydrogen generation for fueling and electric power generation for stationary applications, including battery charging. If you invoke even partial CO2 capture, and for this exercise, we've invoked 40% CO2 capture. That's what we're aiming for in the preliminary engineering analysis with Aramco. And it looks like we can do that relatively easy. So just fractional carbon capture results in the green bars here. The blue bars are the ones that I showed earlier. That's without any carbon capture. And so this space where we're addressing renewable methanol, you see that 40% CO2 capture drives almost all of those routes to renewable methanol into strongly negative carbon intensity. Even municipal solid waste, although it's not negative, it falls well below the US definition of clean hydrogen. And so the concluding slides, we're just beginning to look at how to apply this hydrogen generator technology that converts methanol with water into fuel cell grade hydrogen. How do we apply this in the aerospace and aircraft sector? And we think that these three categories are good fits. Onboard aircraft is the home run. A hydrogen generator combined with a fuel cell, where the hydrogen generator is converting liquid methanol and water on demand into hydrogen, which is used by the fuel cell to make electricity. We think this is extremely attractive, but a lot of engineering work needs to be done here. And we're inviting participation from OEMs and component manufacturers in this space. We'd love to have this to be a strong collaborative exercise. Easier to do would be battery charging stations. These can be thought of as fixed assets that are maybe built into an airport. They can also be thought of as mobile assets. Think of a truck or a trailer that can be moved from one point to another. And the product is electricity, hundreds of kilowatts of electricity for rapid battery charging. And then a third category, which again can be thought of as either stationary with fixed assets or mobile, would be hydrogen fueling infrastructure. And here, the hydrogen generator would be paired with compression and storage and dispensing to put compressed hydrogen on board aircraft, which could be small unmanned drones, or it could be larger manned VTOLs. So a lot of potential here. The low-hanging fruit is in the solving the infrastructure challenge, but the highest value of the IP would probably be realized through on-demand, on-aircraft hydrogen generation. And to that point, we put together this power diagram. On the left, we're showing kilowatts and kilowatt hours for a hypothetical eVTOL with a cruising speed of 125 miles per hour. Battery energy density shown here. In this particular aircraft, we assumed that we would begin with a fully charged battery bank holding right around 36 kilowatt hours of energy with a 2-minute takeoff and then transition to level flight, and then a 2-minute transition from level flight to landing. Those two power demands being supplied only by the battery, and then level cruise flight being supplied at a much lower power level. You get this type of diagram. Total flight duration could be about 65 minutes, and then you're out of juice in the batteries. If we look at a hypothetical fuel cell battery hybrid system, we get this diagram where the fuel cell is providing the 33 to 35 kilowatts of power for level cruising, and then batteries providing the power at takeoff and landing. The blue line shows the mass of the battery, in this case, the blue line representing total battery weight for a battery only solution. And then the flight range is shown on the x-axis. The hydrogen generator has a fixed weight, and that gives us a horizontal line, the gray line here, versus range. The variable would be the weight of methanol and water that is stored on the aircraft. That's shown with the yellow line. When you add those two lines together, you get the orange line, which is the weight of the hydrogen generator plus liquid methanol and water to fly a given distance. So the pure battery solution and the hybrid solution have a crossover point, and that's really the interesting point to understand for specific aircraft. If you want extended range, theoretically, that can be achieved through the hydrogen generator. It can beat batteries when you're talking about extended range applications. Now, a lot of work is needed to get there, but we're not seeing any road stoppers or showstoppers at this point in time. So the take-home message is that methanol to hydrogen generators offer a unique pathway to low-cost hydrogen, low carbon footprint hydrogen, maybe even negative. And methanol to hydrogen avoids the need to build out expensive and inefficient compressed hydrogen infrastructure. Solutions for aviation, include onboard, on-demand hydrogen generation, remote and distributed electric charging infrastructure, and remote and distributed hydrogen fueling infrastructure. And that brings me to the conclusion. As I mentioned, Element One and Nexa Capital are partnering to explore these opportunities, and we encourage participation from others in this space. Please feel free to reach out to myself or to Michael Diamond at Nexa if you have any questions or want to expand the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dave. Extremely interesting. There are a number of questions in the chat box. I am going to call on Bruce Holmes, our sort of resident hydrogen guy. Bruce, you've put several questions into the chat box. Would you mind coming, online and ask what you'd like to ask here?
Yeah, thank you very much, Dave. You've highlighted quite a few factors that can be very interesting. Obviously, you said there's some assembly required, batteries not included. Work ahead. And if my takeaway is correct on the last graphic presentation of data that you showed, what I would conclude is that using on-demand gaseous hydrogen production in an onboard H2 generator in this graph, and like I said, I'm trying to get my head around all the numbers. It takes me a while to do that. My head works slowly. But it appears as, and one of the questions I asked, let me back up a little bit, was, what we really want to understand in all cases of variable solutions for powertrains, whether they're battery, hybrid, hydrogen, whatever, is what the mass fraction relative to the total aircraft mass, including payload, what the mass fraction of the powertrain is. Powertrain including everything, from the storage to the management of electrical systems to to the fuel cell, of course, and all of its controls. And so if I'm interpreting this graphic correctly, it would appear as though the mass fraction of a powertrain, I can't quite tease it out of that graphic. Maybe you can help us a little bit just by responding to the question, how would you compare the powertrain mass fraction for this H2 onboard generator system to a, let's say in one case, a liquid hydrogen powertrain solution for aviation? If you're going to use onboard stored hydrogen, it has to be liquid. Gaseous is a non-starter for volumetric efficiency reasons. And so maybe you can just respond to that mass fraction question, how this might compare, your solution might compare to others.
Right. Well, so I would want to spend more time talking to you about how to define mass fraction in a way that you are comfortable with. And that's not the approach that I took here. The approach that I took is very simple. It's to analyze an aircraft, any aircraft, whether it's manned or unmanned, but the key is that it's electrified. So it has an electric propulsion system already, and the electricity is coming from batteries. So that's the starting point. If that is accepted as the starting point, then it's easy to remove batteries and replace batteries with, in this case, hydrogen generator plus methanol and water to make hydrogen, plus fuel cell. So those are the components that comprise the gray line, the horizontal gray line in the graph on the right. The diagonal blue line is simply the weight of the batteries. So I don't know what the weight of the aircraft is, or the electric motors, or any of that stuff. I don't even know if it's manned or unmanned. For this analysis, we're simply trading off battery weight for fuel cell, hydrogen generator, and methanol and water weight. And it's a very simple, very high level exercise, but really it illustrates a number of points. And I think the most important message here, and so I'm really glad you asked the question. Again, if you look at the the diagonal blue line, it's got slope to it, which means that line approaches the origin. It's not going to go through the origin, but it's going to approach the origin. The gray line is flat, it's horizontal. It is going to intercept high up on the y-axis as we approach the origin. So there's a trade-off there. And in the range of what's shown here on the x-axis as flight range, which could equivalently be expressed as kilowatt hours, okay? When you're in low kilowatt hours, batteries are going to beat the solution every day. When you're in large number of kilowatt hours, even into megawatt hours, batteries are going to lose every day. So the point is to understand where that crossover is. And the same exercise could be done with liquid hydrogen too. I haven't done that. I don't have the mass for the liquid hydrogen tanks and everything that goes with that. But there's no reason that exercise cannot be done.
Yeah, that'd be interesting, just to have that comparative. And your point about the crossover being interesting is that will be interesting to all of us, whether we're starting with battery electric or starting with hydrogen fuel cell electric, because that crossover point is going to move, right? Batteries not going to stay where they are, and by the way, neither will fuel cells. So there are a lot of assumptions, of course, you built into this, but I like the simplicity of it. I'm starting to get my head around it. Thank you for that. I had one other question. I think you answered. I asked whether or not the water in the mix could be saline.
No, the water is going to pass through a vaporizer, right, along with methanol. And for that reason, we do not want to have minerals deposited in the vaporizer.
Right.
So the water should be demineralized. We use the term deionized, which is not exactly correct because dissolved carbon dioxide in water gives you ions and conductivity, but those ions do not lead to mineral deposits. So really the correct term that we should use is demineralized. And we do that with conventional ion exchange resins to get to clean water. Yeah, no, that all makes very clean sense. My last question was for the case where you would use the reformer, the H2 generator system to create hydrogen for fueling. Right. It will be valuable, just a comment, it'll be valuable to include the losses. They're not all that large actually, for on-demand liquefaction from gaseous as a fueling aircraft. Just a thought. Yeah, no, you're right. If you want to compare across the board to liquid hydrogen, that study is not represented in this presentation. In this presentation, I took the simplistic approach that compressed hydrogen is what we would measure ourselves against, because compressed hydrogen is what you see in a lot of the demonstrations that are being reported at this point in time. And probably for smaller aircraft, it's a perfectly viable solution. For smaller aircraft, it's a perfectly viable solution. Agreed. And then the question is kind of where is that crossover? And I do have one last question since Mike gave me the podium. Do you have any interest expressed by the airports people around the places that you're involved in demonstrator projects of the kinds that you illustrated in your previous slide? No, that's been teed up, but the conversations haven't focused yet. But certainly the concept of short range flights and doing that with compressed hydrogen. Yep. And then having a network of distributed, which would almost by definition be remote hydrogen generators, that has come up, and we would welcome the opportunity to focus that and move it forward. And by the way, I think I would love to be having a parallel conversation focused on remote and distributed and maybe even mobile battery charging, conceptually analogous to hydrogen fueling. Yeah, we in my sort of view of it, that should come first. And I live in Virginia, and I'm involved at the state level in a variety of programs. There's a burgeoning, emerging, whatever you want to call it, a high level of interest at the capital level on down into the airport community about having some airport or airports selected in the Commonwealth for
for demonstration projects of various kinds, including battery charging as well as hydrogen solutions. So we might want to have some conversation around that too. Thanks.
Yeah, we should. And, at least to the level of an initial discussion, the same machine can serve both needs.
Right.
Same hydrogen generator could deliver hydrogen for compression, or it could deliver hydrogen to make electricity.
Back to you, Michael. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. I'm going to call on, let's see, I think let's start with Lee Coleman. Lee, you have a number of questions you've posited. Why don't you come online here and ask Dave directly?
Sure. I guess one of the big things is just the what is the main advantage of using this over just using methanol directly, say on an aircraft? I can see the advantages of on the ground transportation of it, but I'm just not seeing it on the aircraft because of the extra mechanical or the extra systems that would be required. And the weight that would add while not getting the mass advantage or the specific energy advantage of the fuel of going with hydrogen directly, or converting, or of using the methanol directly.
Okay, so are you asking why not just use pure methanol to burn in an engine, or pure methanol to make hydrogen to a fuel cell?
No, pure methanol into a fuel cell directly, or in an engine, either way.
Yeah, well, there will be application spaces where burning methanol in an engine makes sense, but they appear to be focusing on tens of megawatts of power requirement in vessels that are sailing the oceans, and those machines, those engines are then tuned to a very high performance levels and operate at constant RPM. Could that be done in aircraft? Perhaps, I don't know. I think the fuel cell and hydrogen generator will still beat the efficiency of the best tuned marine engine, but that's another question. If we focus on going to on methanol, pure methanol to hydrogen to a fuel cell, that can be done either with a direct methanol fuel cell. I don't want to dive into the technical aspects of that at this point in time. I'd be happy to follow up with you if you want. But the short answer to that is that those fuel cells do not have good energy density. They suffer on, which means they have poor energy density, which means you're going to really take a hit on weight. If you look at methanol, pure methanol to hydrogen, and then hydrogen to a PEM fuel cell, that chemistry does not go well. It's got am I getting a lot of noise coming across the line here?
No, we can hear you well.
Okay. So pure methanol is not going to reform to hydrogen cleanly. You get a lot of byproducts, including carbon, which foul up the whole process. But there's nothing wrong. In fact, it's desirable to add water to that methanol because, again, we're getting hydrogen from the water as well.
But from an energy standpoint, that any water you add to the liquid is net energy negative. You're not getting any energy. It's parasitic.
No, that's not the correct way to think about it here, because we're not burning the feedstock. All that we're extracting from the feedstock is the hydrogen component of it.
But the energy stored is only stored in the methanol, in the hydrogen carbon bonds in the methanol. There's no energy in the water.
That's true. That's true if you define energy as based on combustion. But that's not the correct definition to use here. We have to look at it this way. If you split water into hydrogen and oxygen and burn that hydrogen, we know very well the energy content that we get out of it. And if you divide that by the heating value of the water, of course, you get an unsolvable equation. It doesn't make sense because that's not the way to think about it. You would have to divide the energy of the hydrogen, not by the energy content of the water, but by the energy content of the electricity that went into splitting the water. So you're right that water has no heating value, no energy content if we think about combusting fuels. But that's not the way to think about this. And in that case, water is good for us because it's a lot cheaper than methanol.
Well, what I'm referring to is on the aircraft energy storage.
Right.
So
But again,
the energy stored on the aircraft is not going to be any more than the methanol, because it's an endothermic reaction to form hydrogen from. You have to put energy into the water to extract hydrogen from the water, and it's always going to be more than you're going to get back out from reacting that hydrogen with the oxygen.
You're right.
Otherwise, it's a perpetual. Otherwise, it's a perpetual motion machine.
That's correct. It's not a perpetual motion machine. We operate at 84% lower heating value efficiency. But, again, let's continue this conversation. The correct calculation for energy here, or recoverable energy, is hydrogen out to the fuel cell. So the lower heating value of the hydrogen to the fuel cell divided by the lower heating value of the methanol going in. Water takes a ride. The reason water is able to be a feedstock there is because the carbon content of the methanol is converted to CO2, and that energy release inside the system allows us to extract hydrogen from water and methanol. And so we do get high energy efficiency. It doesn't exceed unity. It's not above 100%, but we do get high energy efficiency of 84%. And the water is an active player in there, but it does not become a penalty in the energy efficiency calculation.
So what is the fraction of water that you're mixing with the methanol?
Yeah, on a weight basis, it's 37.5 weight percent water. It's roughly 1-to-1 molar ratio.
Okay, so you've diluted the 20 megajoules per kilogram of the methanol down to 12 megajoules per kilogram.
Yeah, roughly. Yep.
So that's quite bad from an energy storage standpoint. On a mass basis, that's not very good for an aircraft. I put a chart into the chat there that shows your methanol. You're at about 20 megajoules, and then you're knocking that down to about 12 compared to, say, methane, liquid methane, hydrogen, even batteries. You're you're not doing a whole lot better than batteries if you're knocking it down to 12 megajoules per kilogram.
I'll respectfully disagree and suggest we can continue the conversation. You're ignoring the contribution of hydrogen from the water.
But that doesn't bring energy with it, is what I'm saying. That doesn't bring energy. Water does not carry energy. No matter how you look at it.
Yeah, I'm going to ask that we take that conversation further offline after this call. I want to get to a couple of other questions before we wrap this up. So Lee, if that's all right, we'll follow up with you.
Yeah, sorry, Michael, to jump in, but we've also got some big announcements. So hang around, everybody.
Yeah. So I want to ask Tom Jones. Tom, if you can come on, please, and provide your questions. Thank you.
Dave, yeah, thank you very much for a very informative presentation, very interesting, and learn certainly more about the capabilities of methanol and so on. So the one question I had with regard to your graph, because when I did my presentation, I put something similar up there, and I was just wondering why the power level of 36 kilowatts was chosen, and I'm wondering what kind of aircraft that might be for, because the graph you showed over like a 65-minute period would average in the order of about 35 kilowatt hours or 40 kilowatt hours. And you said yourself at that low energy level, batteries would be a better choice.
Right.
I'm just wondering about that.
Yeah. So this aircraft profile was based on information that was shared with me, and my understanding was that I couldn't identify the specific aircraft. So I didn't, and I changed the cruising power as well as the power at takeoff and landing a little bit. The short answer to your question, and you know this very well, is that these profiles are pretty much constant when you look at electric VTOL aircraft. The lines move up and down. The magnitude of the power at takeoff and landing relative to the power at cruising may change, but the general shape is what I've shown here.
Yeah,
So,
understood. Yeah, thank you.
You can put in different numbers. I just put in made up numbers, and yes, these are not just strictly figments of my imagination. They are based on information that was shared with other aircraft, but I just didn't have the liberty to identify those aircraft.
Okay, thanks for the explanation. The second part of my question, it's clear to me, methanol fuel cell systems have very high specific energy, so watt hours per kilogram. And the advantage is long runtime because the energy is coming from, a low fueling weight, with the methanol and the fact that it's not pressurized. So you can carry that as a liquid, and that's a real advantage. But the challenge I've always known with methanol-based fuel cell systems is the specific power. So you can have high specific energies, but the power levels are low. So I'm asking kind of for, say, this particular system, what would the overall system level specific power be? Because that's also a critical requirement, for aircraft, not just the energy on board, but the power available to fly the aircraft.
Yeah, well, in this analysis, the assumption was made that the fuel cell would be selected to provide the cruising power. Okay, the kilowatts required during cruising would be 100% supplied by the fuel cell. And I mean, different assumptions could be made, but the kilowatt hours required at takeoff and landing is a very, very small fraction of the total kilowatt hours over the flight profile. So it makes sense to me that batteries would serve that very well, especially given that kilowatts required at takeoff and landing is many times higher, or I should say is much higher than power required at cruising. So that was the approach that we took here. And I think that makes sense. We've looked at similar profiles, load profiles in the maritime space. But one can, come up with a different architecture if they choose. But I think that that's what is going to make sense for the aviation space, that the fuel cell be sized based on power required for level flight.
Right. No, that's I agree with that. That's for sure. So just looking at your graph here, you're showing like a fuel cell system of about 35 kilowatts, right. and the horizontal gray line, which is 200 kilograms. I'm just wondering what that represents. Is that the total methanol-based fuel cell system weight with fuel, with everything included?
No, that's low temperature PEM fuel cell weight, plus the hydrogen generator weight. The weight of methanol and water is shown by the yellow line.
Okay. Okay, I see. And then the orange line is basically the combination of the two.
That's correct.
I see. So for this particular case, say for 350 miles, you've got a 300 kilogram system that produces 35 kilowatts. And if you do a quick calculation, so 35 kilowatts divided by 300, you've got 116 watts per kilogram. And for an aircraft system, even for cruise, that could be challenging. Yeah.
No doubt. There's a lot of work that would have to be successfully completed in order to get all of this equipment on board an aircraft. The comparison here is not an absolute. It's relative to batteries. Right. And what I'm trying to show is that is exactly the answer that I shared with Bruce earlier, that if you look at total kilowatt hours or megawatt hours required over the mission, you will reach a point where fuel cell plus hydrogen generator plus methanol water is a more attractive solution relative to batteries.
Oh yes, I agree. I agree with that.
Right,
The one
right.
challenge I think is just the overall weight of the system. If you want, the key is you need to be able to fly a very, very long time, and you at some point for aircraft you add so much weight that you can't take off. Like they're.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I understand, Tom. The same exercise can be and should be done versus compressed hydrogen. Right?
Yeah, yeah.
In compressed hydrogen, you have heavy cylinders to store that hydrogen. Now, I can tell you that for land-based vehicles like trucks and buses, we can beat the weight of the hydrogen of the compressed hydrogen cylinders and extend the range. So, the weight associated with putting hydrogen on an aircraft, whether it's compressed or liquefied, is not the weight of the hydrogen. It's the weight of the vessels that's containing the hydrogen. And that is not shown here, but that would be a good exercise to do.
Yeah, you're right, Dave. I look forward to learning more about this, and again, the real point that I'm the final point I'll make is just you have a 35 kilowatt system that weighs 300 kilograms, and from our analysis that would be very, very challenging for any kind of aircraft.
Yeah.
But thank you very much.
Sure.
So thank you, Tom, and thank you everybody else for your participation. Dave will be available to any of you who wish to follow up after this call. And there is going to be a fairly intensive engineering effort undertaken by E1, and I'll get into that detail later on after this call. But Dave has already welcomed interest from those of you that want to pursue further discussions and analysis.
Right.
So Dave, thank you very much.
Right. If I can just add real quickly, I see there's a number of questions in the chat box. If those who put those questions there want to follow up with an email to me with those questions, I'd be happy to respond to them.
Very good. Thank you so much, Dave. All right. Well, we have two other items on the agenda for this call. We have 15 minutes or so. I wanted to let the members of the council know that there's been a lot of legislation and bills that have been passed or are being passed into law, including the most important one, which is the Biden administration's Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, HR 3684. We have been able to go into that 2,702-page bill to extract from that some very interesting findings about hydrogen and its potential evolution or future evolution. We will be distributing a 2-page memo on this to the members of the council. Just by way of summary, we found that in this bill, hydrogen was mentioned 178 times in the bill. And I'd love to contrast that with the other topic that's in favor for everybody. That has to do with charging stations that would not necessarily rely on hydrogen, but maybe just the grid. And hydrogen was outstripped the attention given in this bill by about 2 to 1. And so the memo that we'll be sending around will point to the fact that there's about $65 billion in funds for grid reliability and resiliency that deal with key technologies like carbon capture, and hydrogen is specifically identified and targeted. The bill provides almost $10 billion for clean hydrogen research and development programs. It reestablishes the scope of the Department of Energy's hydrogen research and development program, looking to production of hydrogen, which we touched on one alternative to that having to do with methanol as a potential area. So there's a lot in this bill. It's really literally tens of billions of dollars of potential capital investment in hydrogen, which could have a significant impact on the eVTOL industry. And I hope you all read the bill, don't read the bill, but read our memo. At least we've captured it. I want to provide a note of appreciation. This information that you'll get shortly was compiled with the assistance of the legislative experts at Elevate Government Affairs. Elevate GA is a well-known transportation government affairs consultancy, and they have expertise in the hydrogen area. I will be working with Danielle to propose a probably 1 or 2 hour separate session between now and the end of this month to invite you back for a special call so that the Elevate General Government Affairs people can brief us more specifically on the impact of this bill. Having said that, I'll just conclude by saying that the Biden administration also released the Aviation Climate Action Plan, which has specific reference to hydrogen fuel for short duration aviation flight. Very interesting read. And lastly, the carbon capture, the United Nations COP26 climate talks that concluded this weekend have left the door wide open for a carbon trading scheme that aviation can and should take full advantage of, that would tie into a number of the concepts that we have been addressing through the Hydrogen Council. So with that in mind, just keep an eye on your emails. We'll provide these memos shortly, and Danielle and I will get back to you with a suggested time for the Elevate Government Affairs briefing on the hydrogen aspects of these bills. Danielle, would you like to take the next and final step here on the agenda?
Sure. Thanks so much, Michael. Dave, thank you for your presentation. Congratulations on your initiation. We've all been there. We're an eager group, excited to learn. And I think that $3 and some change price point per kilogram is certainly worth exploring this further. So I cannot believe that it's almost Thanksgiving and we are wrapping up our first year of the Vertical Flight Society Hydrogen eVTOL Council. So I just wanted to thank you all. I think we started about a year ago with maybe 3 of us, and we're up to, I think, 184 people. The amount of momentum and learning that's come out of this year is really impressive. So just, kind of pat yourselves on the back, and thanks everybody so much for contributing. With that said, this is our last 2021 council meeting. As Michael mentioned, we'll have a separate group kind of discussing what we went over today. But our next Hydrogen Council meeting will be in person. And I'll just share my screen. It will be at the Vertical Flight Society Transformative Vertical Flight, which is the 25th through the 27th. Registration for the entire event is $700 for member, $800 for non-member. You don't need to be a member to come to the council meeting, but you don't need to buy a ticket to come to the council meeting, but you probably would want to. We did our best to kind of pack a lot in to that day. So on that Thursday, we'll have our in-person council meeting. So that'll be, what we're doing here. But in person, hands-on, we'll kind of go over everything that we learned in 2021 and then strategize for what we want to do with 2022. Then we'll have a lunch, and then we'll have a hydrogen eVTOL panel. I've reached out to some of you about being on that panel. And then that following Friday will be the Hiller Museum, where there'll be several eVTOLs on display. So if you have not already purchased tickets to the San Jose, we're going to have a day packed of hydrogen and a day packed of eVTOL, and a week packed of eVTOL, really. And then we're also looking at a end of March hydrogen workshop in LA. Be kind of keeping your eye out for more details on that. And I think think that's it from me. I just, wanted to thank everyone for contributing, and maybe point your attention to one last thing. Let's go here. For those of you who are not a member of Vertical Flight Society and haven't joined Hover, this is where we put out all of our information from the council. So you can go in and watch the previous sessions, you can look at the slides, you can communicate. And one thing that I wanted to bring your attention to was I noticed a lot of the companies will have, hydrogen, like I think Zero Avia did theirs just recently, a hydrogen kind of, I'm saying symposium. I don't remember exactly what they called it, but this group is really interactive in here, so we can promote those sorts of things in there. So if any of you know anything related to hydrogen and aviation, let me, Mike, Michael, Jim, one of us know, and either I can put it on here for you or I can show you how to do it. But it's a really good way to get this group involved and keeping the momentum going. So I think with that, thanks everybody so much. And thanks again, Michael, and really excited to see what we do in 2022.
Thanks, Mike.
Very good.
Thanks, Mike. Send the HR 3684 to us, to me, or everybody else. I'd love to read 3,000 pages.
Good. All right, you asked for it, bud. All right, thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.